Welcome, everyone, to the Evolution of Power webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ed Whittingham. I do want to say off the top that today is not actually about the Calgary Comic Expo, so if anyone was hoping to see a moderated conversation between Samwise Gamgee and Darth Maul, you've come to the wrong channel. Instead, today we're going to dive into the world of renewable energy. And we're going to unpack some of the wind and solar opportunities that exist specifically here in Alberta. And to help us better understand how renewable energy in North America is faring and the opportunities that Canadian renewable energy developers face and the opportunities for other companies to be active in the market through power purchase agreements, I'm joined here in Calgary by Dan Balaban. Dan, yeah, great to have you. Dan Balaban is the founder, president, and CEO of Greengate Power, which is an Alberta-based renewable energy developer. Now, Greengate is one of the most successful renewable energy developers out there. It has 450 megawatts worth of projects operating that it's successfully developed at a capital cost of about $1 billion. And today, Greengate has a very extensive pipeline of wind and solar projects of about 1,000 megawatts. Dan himself is an accomplished entrepreneur and with a long and proven track record of successful startups. Prior to starting up Greengate, Dan was the founder and CEO of Roughneck.ca, which provided technology solutions to the Canadian oil and gas industry. Previously, he was a management consultant with Ernst & Young and PricewaterhouseCoopers. And he is also currently a board member at the Pembina Institute, a former board member of the Independent Power Producers Society of Alberta, and a founding member of the Alberta Clean Electricity Coalition, which is how Dan and I actually first got to know each other more than a dozen years ago today. So here's the game plan for the webinar. Dan is going to give us a kickoff presentation. I don't want to give you any spoilers, but he's going to talk about, as we say, renewable energy and some of the opportunities that we face. He's going to do that for the first 10 to 15 minutes. Followed by that, Dan and I are going to have a bit of a fireside chat just to unpack what Dan has presented. And after that, we're going to open it up to the floor to all of you for questions. So at that point, we're really hoping to have a lively conversation. So we encourage all of you to use the webinar technology to submit to us your questions. So I ask you, take a minute to look at the GoToWebinar dashboard, familiarize yourselves with the question box that you'll see on the dashboard. That's where we ask you to submit your questions. Daniel Cunningham, who is Greengate's Manager of Business Development, he's going to be fielding your questions and relaying them to me so that we can pose them during the Q&A session. And should you have any technical difficulties as we go with either the video or the audio, you can actually use that question box to submit them to Daniel, and he'll help you to troubleshoot. So with that, I think we know what we're going to do, and I'd say without any further ado, let's hear from Dan Balaban. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to sit down with you and chat about this topic that's pretty dear to both of our hearts. Like you said, we've been working on this issue together for more than a dozen years. Ed used to be the executive director of the Pembina Institute and works as a consultant providing policy and project support in the clean tech sector, and I really enjoy working with you. So looking forward to having a lively discussion.
Thank you.
So maybe we'll get into the renewables piece of it. Cue up the next slide, please. So we're here, and the age of renewables has arrived. Renewable energy is a technology and industry that's been growing for quite a number of decades, has been growing at a pretty consistent rate of over 10% compounded annual growth for quite a while. But we've reached a tipping point in renewables in that renewables now make sense on a subsidy-free basis, and that's a really significant point. Over the last couple of decades, Renewables growth has primarily been driven by jurisdictions that were trying to take early action for environmental reasons. So places like Germany, Spain, Ontario, California, all those places implemented policies and had, pretty strong incentives for renewables and helped grow the renewable energy industry globally around the world. And as a result of that early adoption, the prices of renewables has really continued to come down. The technologies continued to improve. And we've now reached the tipping point where, like I said, renewables make sense on a subsidy-free basis. So renewables now make sense in any jurisdiction that requires new power generation. And I think the implications for that are pretty significant, and I believe we're going to see over the next decade an explosion of renewable energy growth across the globe, and again, primarily driven by economic considerations. If you could have, the lowest cost technology also be the cleanest technology, I think it's a pretty compelling case. So in terms of Alberta, Alberta has, a really interesting opportunity. So we're we have excellent fossil fuel resources, which is really well known, but we also have some of the best renewable energy resources in the world. We have some of the best onshore wind resources. We have some of the best solar resources, despite being really far north. Alberta has more than 300 days a year of sunshine. We're truly the sunshine state of the north with a solar resource that's comparable to Florida. So, lots of renewable energy opportunity in Alberta. But the other thing that we have in Alberta is that we're also the only deregulated power generation market in the country, and it's the only market where it's possible for corporates and renewable energy projects to contract directly and enter into bilateral contracting. And what that does is it really provides a market in Alberta that can be the source of greening the grid for any company, or greening the operations for any companies that are looking to green their Canadian operations. It's really quite interesting, and it's really an example of how Alberta has more to export than oil through contentious pipelines. We also have the ability to export renewable energy credits across the country. There's other reasons why corporates should be looking at Alberta. Like I said, phenomenal renewable energy resources, so allows renewables to be procured at a low cost. We're the only deregulated power generation market in the country, which makes it at the end of the day the only market where bilateral contracting is possible. But we're also the most emissions-intensive grid. So for companies that are looking to get the biggest bang for their buck, the biggest environmental impact for the amount of investment, Alberta is the place to do it. The reason that is because the vast majority, or the majority of our electricity today comes from coal, which is quite emissions intensive, and the opportunity to displace that high emissions intensity generation with no emissions-free renewables, really has the opportunity to provide a very tangible and high impact in terms of reducing or improving overall environmental performance. One of the areas that we've seen renewables really been growing over the last number of years is through direct contracting between projects and corporates. Traditionally, renewables has grown on the back of government support, like I mentioned, where governments all around the world would offer long-term contracts, long-term power purchase agreements for renewable projects to see them, develop and be built out. And what we're seeing now is that corporates are starting to fill the role that governments had traditionally been playing as corporates try to improve their corporate sustainability. There's a number of corporates all around the world that have committed to going 100% renewables. That's in order to meet their sustainability goals. Those sustainability goals exist for a number of different reasons. Companies, investors that are looking for companies to manage their carbon liability. Employees, for the purposes of recruiting and retaining new employees. Employees are increasingly interested in working for companies that have a social and an environmental conscience. and implementing renewables and buying renewables to essentially green the operations of companies is something that has been really interesting and something that has really taken off in the United States. So in 2018 alone, there was more than $10 billion of new renewable energy projects that were brought online on the back of virtual power purchase agreements with corporates. And what we see is an opportunity to bring that same type of approach to Canada, and specifically Alberta, to see the renewable energy sector grow in this province as well, so that companies, Canadian companies, can green their Canadian operations and meet their sustainability goals. So a little bit about corporate PPAs. So like I mentioned, traditionally power projects are built on the back of a power purchase agreement. That's a long-term contract by which an entity, used to be government, would offer a long-term purchase agreement to renewable energy project. Like I said, it's being increasingly replaced by corporates that are doing the same thing. And the mechanism by which that makes the most sense in Alberta, and the mechanism by which that has been done for corporates in the United States to date, is through what's called a virtual power purchase agreement, or a VPPA. And essentially, what a VPPA is a corporate party provides price certainty to a renewable energy project, and in return for providing that price certainty, the corporate obtains all the environmental attributes associated with the project, or all the RECs, or renewable energy credits, whatever that term is used. It's got a few different terms, but essentially to claim the environmental benefits that that project generates. And the way a VPPA would work in the Alberta market is a company would offer a fixed price guarantee for all the power that's produced. That power continues to get sold in the Alberta power pool. If the project realizes a price that's lower than the price guarantee provided by the corporate would make a payment to the project to true it up to that level. But what we're seeing now with the way renewable energy prices have continued to come down, we're seeing it's going to be more likely on the other side, that if the project sells into the market and receives a higher price than what the corporate guarantees, then the corporate gets paid. And I believe we're moving into a world now where environmental attributes can be procured under long-term contracts by corporates at no cost, or possibly even be a profitable transaction, as corporates trade that price certainty for a project in return for claiming the environmental benefits at a very low price. Okay, so those are some of my initial thoughts on the topic, and happy to follow up with any questions you might have.
Great, thanks, Dan. We've got a lot to unpack. So let's take a few minutes. Let's you and I unpack what you've just talked about, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. So the first one is, I want to go back. You had talked about $10 billion in the United States in 2018 of transactioned corporate PPAs. We know that we've got these mega companies like Apple, Walmart, Budweiser, if you watch the Super Bowl, knowing that they're touting their green electricity, and we're hearing of more and more companies that are not just offsetting or greening, let's say, a portion of their electricity, they're going 100%. So you spoke very clearly about the sustainability benefits, for corporate sustainability, and I get that, employee retention and whatnot. But ultimately, these companies have to, really pay attention to the bottom line. So you hit upon it with this price certainty. Tell us more, like, how is that as a driver for all those companies now that have these 100% renewable targets?
Yeah, so so the traditional model for companies to green their operations or claim some type of green benefit, so in the old world where renewables required subsidization, companies would buy the renewable energy credits from projects directly, essentially paying a premium price to claim the environmental benefit associated with renewables. So that model has evolved now so that we're we're now in an environment where renewables make sense on a subsidy-free basis. They no longer require subsidization. They make sense on a subsidy-free basis. And not only do they make sense on a subsidy-free basis, in many places like Alberta, renewables are actually the lowest cost piece of the energy mix. So with the virtual PPA, what corporates are doing is providing price certainty to projects, so guaranteeing them a fixed price in the market, and in return for providing that price guarantee, claiming the environmental benefits associated with that. Because the level of price certainty that renewable energy projects require is now so low, because renewables are so cost effective, that transaction can actually be profitable for companies, because that price guarantee is ultimately below the actual market price for power. And that difference, that profit, under this sort of virtual PPA arrangement, goes to the corporate buyer.
So on those prices, can you give us some specific examples? Because Alberta's had auctions just in the last year. What were those prices like, and how much below were they the say average pool price?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So the historical average pool price, Alberta power pool price, has been about $51 a megawatt hour over the last 10 years. Which is a pretty reasonable price. But wind was just procured under long-term contract at the end of last year for about $39 a megawatt hour, so well below the average historical price. Solar was procured for $48 a megawatt hour, again below the average historical price. So as those projects are producing in the grid, typically they're going to receive something around the average price. And those are two examples of proof where pricing actually came in below the average price, and in those cases, those contracts should be profitable for what in this case is the government, which is providing that price guarantee. Another interesting point is the difference between wind and solar. So wind and solar are both emissions-free sources of energy, but both really great to help meet sustainability objectives. But in the Alberta market, we see tremendous near-term potential in the case of solar, probably more so than wind. We have a whole bunch of wind that's coming online in this province in the next couple of years, which is great for our environmental performance and great for Alberta consumers. But the nice thing about solar is solar produces during on-peak hours, where wind usually produces during off-peak hours. So off-peak hours, are nighttime and times of, relatively lower power usage. But solar produces during hot, sunny days. Those are the days when we have the highest amount of air conditioning load. Those are some of the tightest supply hours in the market. And as a result, solar typically receives a premium to the average power price. So if you compare the average power price of $50, $51 a megawatt hour, solar came in at 48. Solar, if it sells into the market, is likely to receive something that's even higher than the average price, again showing that solar has the potential to actually be a profitable transaction.
So in so many words, solar is like harvesting the most lucrative hours during the day.
Exactly, yeah. Solar is producing the most valuable energy that we need in the Alberta system.
Gotcha. So we're hearing more and more examples of, let's say you're a commercial property owner and you've got lots of roof space. So you hear companies are putting up massive rooftop solar arrays. You're hearing of companies that have big distribution centers and they're trying to build next to it, say, a solar array. So that's, I understand, you've got the renewable project right next to your bricks and mortar, and you're getting those electrons directly. But you talked about virtual PPAs, and that's not the case. So can you just expand on how is it that you can have your distribution center here, but be investing in a renewable energy project, could be thousands of kilometers away, but still tied to it?
Yeah, so our grid is interconnected, and practically speaking, electricity travels really quickly at about a 1/3 the speed of light. So something that is injected into the grid, 1,000 kilometers away, can instantaneously, reach Calgary, for example.
Faster than Superman.
Faster than Superman, and during this, Comic-Con festival, very appropriate. Okay. I'm going to go put my Chewbacca outfit on after this little discussion we're having. I thought I'd spare everybody that today. But anyway, so we have a grid that's interconnected. What makes a virtual power purchase agreement really, really interesting is it's a way of companies contributing to more renewable energy coming on into the grid, which is really the objective of corporate sustainability, or one of the key objectives of corporate sustainability, but benefit from the economies of scale. A rooftop solar installation, while it's good, has very limited ability to impact overall amount of electricity produced. They're relatively small installations, but as a result of them being small installations, they're relatively expensive as well. Not saying they're not a good idea, they're a great idea, but they're a very small piece of the overall solution. To cost effectively procure and result in large amounts of renewable energy coming into the grid, that requires, generally speaking, larger projects like our 400 megawatt Traverse Solar project that we're developing, which has tremendous economies of scale, the potential to deliver some very low cost renewables and provide a very meaningful impact in one single project.
So if I get this right, with a virtual PPA, you can green your corporate image, you can show your employees in the communities where you operate that you care about the environment.
Yeah.
You can help to get more renewable electricity on grid that would otherwise happen on its own, and you don't have to overpay.
Well, you can actually make money doing it.
Yeah.
That is a very significant paradigm shift that has happened as we've moved from the world of subsidized renewables into the world of subsidy-free and low-cost renewables. It can actually be going green can mean green in two ways, helping the environment and also contributing to the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, you can see why it's taking off in the U.S.
Yeah.
So you've used the term REC, you've used the term environmental benefit, you've used the term environmental attribute. I've heard in the past green tag. What are we talking about here, and how does a company actually, create value out of these environmental attributes they get?
Yeah. So, so for every megawatt hour of electricity that's generated, or kilowatt hour of electricity that's generated, and that's the unit of measure in the world of electricity. It's like the same as a barrel of oil or whatever. In the electricity world, it's kilowatt hour or megawatt hour. So for every unit of electricity that is generated, what a renewable energy project earns is what's called a renewable energy credit, or it could be called an environmental attribute, or a green tag, or an environmental benefit. Call it whatever you want, but there is this benefit that is created by that electricity being created in a way that doesn't produce emissions. And then what companies do is they earn these credits, and they can use these credits to green their existing operations, to green the electricity that they're currently consuming.
And does it become like a commodity that's marketable? Like, can they then sell that openly in the market? How does that work?
Oh yeah, I mean, renewable energy credits are sold all over the globe, both in voluntary compliance situations and actual regulatory compliance situations. But companies that are choosing to enter into virtual PPAs are using those environmental attributes for themselves to green their own operations to meet their corporate sustainability objectives.
So if you're like in resource extraction and you're a big industrial emitter, you can use that toward your own compliance. If you're not and your emissions are low, you can actually take that and trade it and treat it as a commodity.
Yeah. So if you're a mining company in a jurisdiction that has strict environmental compliance requirements, or a better example, if you're an oil sands company or oil and gas company here in Alberta that has a regulated emissions compliance requirement. We have the ESCR 2.0 program that was just announced by the new government, which is going to continue to put a price for carbon on the industrial sector in this province. Those sorts of companies that have a compliance requirement under that program can source renewable attributes, environmental attributes from renewables in Alberta as part of the program. For companies outside of Alberta that are wanting to green their Canadian operations, again, they can source the environmental attributes that are generated from the projects here in Alberta to green the electricity that they're consuming elsewhere in the country.
Well, that's where I want to go. I want to sort of bring it to Canada and then more specifically to Alberta. So first to Canada, this is obviously taking off like wildfire in the U.S. You seem bullish on corporate PPAs and what's going to happen here in Canada around them. Why? Why is it going to take off here?
Well, there's a number of companies all over the world. The RE100, as an example, it's a group of companies all over the world. Some of the largest companies in the world that have all committed to going to 100% renewable. So they already have corporate sustainability goals, and they've already decided that renewable energy is the way they're going to meet those corporate sustainability goals. So the first place that was done was in the United States, where we started to see a lot of those deals being done. There's been relatively little that's been done in Canada. All the while, renewable energy costs have continued to come down, and the business case for doing so continues to become better and better as time goes on. And as a number of those companies have learned their lessons by doing these sorts of deals in the United States, we believe a number of them are now poised to do that now for their Canadian operations as well. And there's a number of initiatives that have recently been coming to Canada, like the Business Renewable Center, which is an ecosystem for buyers, project developers, and intermediaries to all get to know each other and provide a form of education. So to start the process going of these transactions coming into Canada.
And Greengate's a founding member.
Yeah, we're a founding member of that initiative, and providing some of our insight and thought leadership around that. And we're very excited. We're not the only ones that are founding members. There are a number of other companies that are involved as well. And we think it's a signal that the Canadian market is primed for these same sorts of deals that are going on in the States today.
Okay. Let's talk specifically about Alberta and the opportunities and the challenges. So on the opportunity side, you mentioned that Alberta has an emissions-intensive grid. So maybe remind us sort of why is it emissions-intensive? And then why, as the CEO of Greengate, why are you bullish about the growth of renewables here in Alberta?
Yeah, so today the majority of the power in Alberta comes from coal. And coal on a per unit basis produces more carbon emissions and more air emissions than any other source of power generation that we have in the world today. So the opportunity to replace what would otherwise be coal-fired electricity with renewables has a really meaningful impact, because you're displacing what is the most polluting source of power generation that exists anywhere in the world with what is the cleanest source of power generation. So very significant impact. If you compare that to building renewables in a place that is mostly served by hydro today, it's still a good thing to do, but hydro, for example, has no emissions. So you don't have the same type of environmental impact in a place that's primarily driven by hydro. So Alberta has the potential for a pretty significant impact. Why am I excited about the renewable prospects in Alberta? Because we have phenomenal renewable energy resources. We have an industry that is emissions intensive. It's the driver of our economy, and very important that we continue to see that our oil and gas industry continues to thrive in this province. But at the same time, we need to be responsible about it and drive areas where we can improve environmental performance, and renewables are the lowest cost way of doing that for the high emitters in this province. And for, like I said, for companies outside of Canada, we have other products we can export besides oil. We have renewable energy credits, which we can export to the rest of the country as well.
Yeah, and picking up on what you said in your presentation, the TSN turning point, it seems, for renewables in Alberta is the fact that now we can develop them on an unsubsidized basis.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Because typically, for years and years, we thought, hey, like wind, hey, and like solar, but they need a lot of government help in order to get out there. But you don't think that they need the same government help anymore?
No, not only do I think we, there's recent data that supports it. The old narrative was, yeah, renewables are great for the environment, but they're very expensive. So I'll take a pass. But now that has dramatically changed. Like I said, technology has continued to improve. Costs, continue to go down. It's like computers. In the late 60s, we sent humans to the moon with a computer that would have filled a building. Now we carry a computer in the palm of our hand that's more powerful than what sent humans to the moon. The same sort of trend has been happening in renewables, where costs have come down. And like I said, TSN turning point, we've reached the tipping point where renewables now make sense on a subsidy-free basis. And like I said, that was proven by the prices that came in for wind and solar in the recent Alberta auctions.
Yeah. Were you there in the room? Because I wasn't, but I've heard back when the first prices were announced that there was an audible gasp.
Well, yeah, I was in the room and I was one of the people gasping. Like, I knew prices were going to come in low, but I didn't realize how low they ended up coming in. I think, all the different players digested that news, and then we had a second and third round of procurement where pricing was just as low as the first round. So I think it proved that it wasn't a fluke. This is a consistent thing that's been proven over and over again.
These low prices are here to stay.
These low prices are definitely here to stay.
Great. Well, we're a half hour in, and as much as I hate to cut off the conversation you and I are having, I do want to give people, participants in the webinar, a chance to weigh in with their questions. So my lovely assistant, Daniel Cunningham, has been furiously transcribing your questions that are coming in up on a whiteboard so that I can see them. So the first question we have, and sorry, I don't know who's asking, but from one of our participants, is what are the key risks corporates should understand? And presumably with regards to corporate PPAs.
Yeah, so so as it relates to VPPA opportunities here in Alberta, I think there's a few things that corporates really need to consider. So if they're entering into a virtual PPA, one is know who the party is that is behind the project. Is it a company that has experience, has the capability to actually execute on the project? There's lots of renewable energy ideas out there, but it's quite a complicated process to turn a renewable energy idea into a real opportunity, into a project that ultimately is operating and generating electricity. And that's, quite frankly, that's what we have proven over the last dozen years that we're really good at Greengate. But another thing that corporates really need to understand is what the potential cost is associated with entering into virtual PPAs. And as I mentioned, we think now in this subsidy-free, really low-cost renewables environment, those transactions actually have the potential to make money for corporates. So I think understanding that is important, and we've got a great team. And if you're anybody that's interested can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to explain how that's possible.
Yeah, this is the equivalent of saying my book is available in fine bookstores everywhere. How can they reach out? I'm sure we'll come back to it, but they reach out. How would they do that?
Yeah, I think our contact names are currently on the screen, so you can reach out to Daniel Feldman, who's our Director of Origination, or to Daniel Cunningham, who's our Manager of Business Development. Both of them would be happy to answer any questions that companies may have.
And is everyone here at Greengate named Dan or Daniel?
We have quite a number of us named that name, strictly by coincidence. It's, we've got an Ed that we're chatting with right now, so it's not only Dan's that matter.
I represent diversity here.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. How long should my organization expect this process to take? And again, that's, I imagine, the corporate PPA contracting process.
Yeah, it all depends on how far up the curve, companies are in terms of their understanding of this. But, these are contracts that are, relatively complex to get your head around. We can definitely make it simple. We understand this. We can, walk companies through this. But I think realistically, from first conversation to execution, you're looking at a 6 to 12 month process. 6 to 12 months. Okay. How do I fill my 24-hour electricity needs, with variable renewables? Yeah, so with the virtual PPA, it's not actually a physical deal. What it is what is truly what's called a hedge against power costs. So the simplest way of doing it is for companies to continue buying their power from their retailer, and on the side enter into what's a virtual PPA, which is essentially a financial contract. As power prices go up, you pay more to your retailer, but you also end up making more money on the virtual PPA because you're guaranteeing a low cost to the project and making money if power prices go up. So it's a way of offsetting power costs through a hedge, and at the same time being able to claim ownership of all the environmental attributes associated with that generation. Yeah, now you said that a few times, and I know it took a long time for me to wrap my mind around it. You can do all of this and make money as a company. Yes, you can. Yeah.
looking at the next question, how can these contracts help my organization with increasing compliance costs? Maybe it's sort of building on the theme we were just talking about.
Yeah, so for companies in the case here of Alberta, so companies that have environmental compliance requirements here in Alberta under the ESCR 2.0 program, which was just announced by our new government in their platform, renewables generate environmental attributes that could be used as an alternative mechanism of complying. Mm-hmm. So under the current program, there's a certain amount per ton that companies need to pay if they're above the emissions threshold. Instead of paying, it starts at $20 a ton here in Alberta, potentially escalating over time. So as an alternative paying that $20 a ton, you can buy renewable energy credits or environmental attributes, whatever term again you want to use, sure, from renewables projects here in Alberta as an alternative to paying that compliance cost.
Okay. So this is where we're getting into the dollars and cents portion. How much should my organization budget for annual costs?
Well, like I said, it's potential that rather than budgeting for annual costs, you'd be budgeting for an annual profit center.
True.
So, yeah, something that, again, we'd be happy to discuss in more detail.
Okay. Yeah, and well, we talked about this. Maybe let's repeat it. Are the prices from the most recent renewable procurements real? That's a good question. You've had a couple rounds, and you get all the companies out there that are willing to do anything to get into these auctions. But we concluded a few minutes ago by saying these prices are here to stay. So again, why do you think the prices are here to stay?
Yeah, if Alberta was the only place in the world there where we saw low-cost renewables, you might say it's a fluke, but we're seeing low-cost renewables all over the world, all over the Western world, all over the developing world. Generally speaking, renewables are coming in at a low cost, and Alberta just proved that what's happening elsewhere in the world is also possible in Alberta. And like we were saying, we had an initial round of procurement where pricing came in at an average price of under $40 a megawatt hour. Under $40 a megawatt hour, that's a remarkably low number. Mm-hmm. And then we followed it up with a second and third round where, again, prices came in at under $40 a megawatt hour. So I think it really demonstrated that it wasn't a one-time thing. It's something that is here to stay. And I would know we're one of the winners of a contract in the last round of procurement. So we have experience winning and delivering renewables at that low cost.
Yeah, actually, not a question from the floor, but you mentioned you're a winner of one of the called the REP rounds, renewable electricity procurement rounds, and it's in partnership with the First Nation. Can you expand upon that a bit?
Yeah, so that project we're developing in partnership with Potential Renewables, who's our commercial partner, but we also developed that project with the Paul First Nation. Mm-hmm. Under the previous government, there was a program that encouraged industry First Nations partnerships. We partnered with the Paul First Nation, who will be an equity owner in the project and will realize an ongoing source into their community, ongoing source of revenue into their community for the next 30 plus years that this project will be operating. I had the pleasure of going up to visit Chief and Council last month, and to see with my own eyes the sort of impact that this economic development opportunity will have on the community. It's really quite moving. It's really exciting that we can generate electricity and develop an industry that's fundamentally good for the environment, but also can have a really meaningful economic and social impact.
Yeah, and you're following in the footsteps of your father, right, in terms of being a trailblazer and developing energy in clean ways, but also in a way that allows for Indigenous communities to participate in that economic development.
Yeah, so my father, my late father, was an energy entrepreneur who had a history of doing deals with First Nations communities. He believed in environmental and also social justice, and I think he would be very, very happy with the deal that we did. I think he'd be proud of us.
I'm sure he would. And we can add that to the benefits list that we said, of all the benefits that accrue from doing these deals. I'm just looking through, can you send electricity through transmission to the U.S. and Ontario?
It's not really about supplying the electricity directly. So, where I talk about the model of Alberta greening the grid, greening the operations of Canadian companies across the country, the electricity doesn't need to be physically delivered. What you can do is you can enter into a virtual PPA with a company here in Alberta, result in new renewable energy being brought onto the grid, and as a result claim the environmental benefits which you can use to green your operations across the country.
Okay. This one you might need to explain a bit. Under a virtual PPA, are RECs still serialized? So when you answer the question, can you say what you mean by serialized?
Yes. So when RECs are produced, they're each given a unique identifier, so that there's a mechanism to ensure that RECs aren't double counted. You don't want more than one buyer for the same renewable energy credit.
Yeah.
So there's still auditing processes required to ensure that there is the sale of a single REC to only one buyer one time.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So tell us, what resources are available out there for buyers? You'd mentioned, say, the Business Renewable Center. There have to be other places that buyers can turn to, in addition to this great team at Greengate, available to find stores everywhere.
So happy to make our team available for folks that want to learn more. Daniel and Daniel are both available. But the Business Renewable Center is a great place to go. There's all sorts of resources there that are available. The Pembina Institute has been leading the charge towards a clean energy future for our country, and has all sorts of research and materials available there. Sarah Hastings-Simon is our representative from the Pembina Institute that is involved in the Business Renewable Center. There's lawyers, there's other intermediaries that are involved in this business, and happy to share some names with those that are interested in reaching out and chatting with us some more.
Great. I think we've pretty much exhausted the question pipeline, and we're more than 40 minutes in at this point. Given what's happening in Calgary this week, we can't end without discussing who your favorite Star Wars character is.
Well, I already said I'm going to change back into my Chewbacca outfit after I got here. So.
Do you have to grow your beard out a bit so you look a little more Chewbacca-like?
A little bit more beard and the rest of my body hair. So.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that, like I said, when I was walking here, I saw a lot of people in costume. I haven't seen a Captain Kirk yet. And if I look at all the shows out there, I know he's an oldie but a goodie.
Well, you might be aging yourself. You might be aging both of us. I really loved the original Captain Kirk, William Shatner.
Yeah.
Greatest character.
Well, years ago I went to McGill, and for a while they renamed the student center the William Shatner Student Center at McGill in the 90s. I think they moved back now because William Shatner went to McGill years ago. Yeah. But I did see the best costume, and I wish those people who are out there while we're watching this are probably in the parade right now, was people dressed up like the Spanish Inquisition from the Monty Python sketch. So I walked by them, and I went, "Spanish Inquisition!" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition." So for all you Python heads out there, that one's for you. Well, Dan, thanks.
Thank you for
We've had a great conversation today. Yeah. I've learned a lot. I hope all our participants on the webinar today have learned a lot as well. And with a bit of luck, we'll get a chance to do this again.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for everybody that joined.
Yeah. Happy Friday and have a great weekend.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.